One claim that some people make is that Hitler was a socialist. After all, Hitler does say, socialism as the final concept of duty, the ethical duty of work, not just for oneself, but also for one's fellow man's sake, and above all, the principle common good before own good, a struggle against all parasitism, and especially against easy and unearned income. And we were aware that in this fight we can rely on no one but our own people. We are convinced that socialism, in the right sense, will only be possible in nations and races that are Aryan, and there in the first place we hope for our own people, and are convinced that socialism is inseparable from nationalism. Note that Marxist socialism has absolutely nothing to do with having to be what Hitler calls Aryan, nor were Slavic people considered Aryan by Hitler. I am here to refute that Hitler's diluted version of what he called quote-unquote socialism was nothing like Marxist socialism. In fact, Hitler separates himself from Marxist socialists. This video will mainly be comparing what Hitler calls socialism to Soviet Marxist-Leninist socialism and the attitude that the Soviet Union held about race during this time. Hitler states regarding Marxist socialism, socialism is the science of dealing with the common weal. Communism is not socialism. Marxism is not socialism. The Marxians have stolen the term and confused its meaning. I shall take socialism away from the socialists. Socialism is an ancient Aryan Germanic institution. Our German ancestors held certain lands in common. They cultivated the idea of the common weal. Marxism has no right to disguise itself as socialism. Socialism, unlike Marxism, does not repudiate private property. Unlike Marxism, it involves no negotiation of personality, and unlike Marxism, it is patriotic. We might have called ourselves the Liberal Party. We chose to call ourselves the National Socialist. We are not internationalist. Our socialism is national. We demand the fulfillment of the just claims of the productive classes by the state on the basis of race solidarity. To us, state and race are one. Another notable thing is, although Lenin was before the World War II era, he's still the founder of the Soviet Union, and Lenin did a speech on antisemitism which shows that Soviet socialism did not hold the views of what Hitler calls socialism. Lenin says that antisemitism means spreading enmity towards the Jews. When the accursed Tsarist monarchy was living its last days, it tried to incite ignorant workers and peasants against the Jews. The Tsarist police, in alliance with the landowners and the capitalists, organized pogroms against the Jews. The landowners and capitalists tried to divert the hatred of workers and peasants who were tortured by want against the Jews. In other countries, too, we often see the capitalists fomenting hatred against the Jews in order to blind the workers, to divert their attention from the real enemy of the working people. Capital hatred towards the Jews persists only in those countries where slavery to the landowners and capitalists has created abysmal ignorance amongst the workers and peasants. Only the most ignorant and downtrodden people can believe the lies and slanders that are spread about the Jews. This is survival of ancient feudal times, when the priests burned the heretics at the stake, and when the peasants lived in slavery, and when the people were crushed and inarticulate. This ancient feudal ignorance is passing away. The eyes of the people are being opened. It is not the Jews who are the enemy of the working people. The enemy of the workers are the capitalists of all countries. Amongst the Jews there are working people, and they form the majority. They are brothers who, like us, are oppressed by capital. They are comrades in the struggle for socialism. Amongst the Jews there are kulaks, exploiters, and capitalists, just as there are amongst Russians and amongst people of all nations. The capitalists strive to sow and foment hatred between workers of different faiths, different nations, and different races. Those who do not work are kept in power by by the power and strength of capital, rich Jews, like rich Russians and rich in all countries, are in alliance to oppress, crush, rob, and disunite the workers. Being a communist in Nazi Germany was not taken lightly. According to HMD.org, on assuming power in 1933, the first people the Nazis targeted for arrest and imprisonment were political opponents, primarily communists, trade unionists, and social democrats. Dachau, the first concentration camp, was built in 1933 to imprison political opponents. The Communist Party, KPD, was banned in March 1933. Trade unions were disbanded in May, and the Social Democrats, SPD, abolished in June. Leaders of these parties and unions were arrested or fled into exile. By the end of 1933, there were almost 27,000 people imprisoned in concentration camps, and the majority of these were political prisoners. Of course, later on there were much more prisoners persecuted for other reasons. The Nazis persecuted Jews, Roma people, Black, Slavic and Polish people, disabled people, gay people, political opponents, and many more. In comparison to Lenin's speech on anti-Semitism, Hitler went on to say, Antisemitism based on purely emotional grounds will always find its ultimate expression in the form of pogroms. A rational anti-Semitism, however, must lead to the systematic legal fight against and the elimination of the prerogatives of the Jew. Its ultimate goal, however, must unalterably be the elimination of the Jews altogether. The Soviet Union's founder would never agree with this statement. Hitler also states regarding Bolshevism that the Treaty of Versailles and the Treaty of Saint-Germain are kept alive by Bolshevism in Germany. The peace treaty and Bolshevism are two heads of one monster. We must decapitate both. Hitler regarded communism and Bolshevism as Jewish concepts. Comparatively, in Soviet culture in 1936, when the leader was Stalin, there was a popular film liked by Joseph Stalin himself that cultivated an anti-racist theme and showed the Soviet Union's attitude on race. The film was called Circus and was incredibly progressive for its time. Notably, the film does portray a cool German man that might have taken inspiration from the real-life Adolf Hitler. The film follows a woman with a biracial child whose father was Black. It was implied he was lynched by the Americans, and the woman is forced to flee. She ends up with a cruel German man working in the circus. Wikipedia states on this film, Ludwig, a Soviet, tells Knazius, the cruel German, that the people of the Soviet Union do not share his concerns about racial purity or race at all. Dixon, the white mother's Black son, is embraced by friendly Soviet people. Knazius, I'm sorry, I'm pronouncing his name wrong, tries to seize Jimmy, the Black child, but the audience unites to save him. Finally, a group of blurry Red Army soldiers in the audience block Kitsnich, who cowers in fear and leaves. The film also portrays a Black man in the audience married to a Russian woman, meant to showcase there is no room for racism in the Soviet Union, which is very different than Hitler's racist ideology he dares to call socialism. At the end of the film, the people of the Soviet Union take turns singing a lullaby to the child, with lines being in different languages that various Soviet citizens would have spoken. But the lyrics translate to, sleep comes to your doorstep, sleep very, very soundly. 100 paths, 100 doorways are open to you. Hitler, on the other hand, considered interracial couples to be a disgrace. Hitler was not a socialist and is not in any way comparable to Marxist socialists, and especially not to historical examples of socialist countries, such as the Soviet Union. Signing off, comrades.